Dominick Cruz, Chito Vera. Guys, I love this match. I know that you guys do too. But there's a few moving parts here. So, Dominick Cruz did an interview 2 months ago, possibly 3. It was a program called Wrestling Changed My Life Podcast. It's actually called that. It's not a podcast called Wrestling Changed My Life. The name of it is Wrestling Changed My Last Podcast. I'm telling you that in case you want to go look for it. It was the most interesting interview that Dominick has ever done. Because there's certain things that we don't talk about. There's certain things within the business, if you're here long enough, that you learn that we don't talk about publicly. In whatever mood they caught Dominick in, Dominick talked. And Dominick kept talking. And you'd only know what to listen for if you were in the know. It was just a great interview, though. It was a great interview. One thing that he talked about is his own approach. And his own approach when he gets a call from Sean Shelby is just simply, he doesn't care about what the opponent does. He doesn't care, southpaw, orthodox, and where does this fight take me? Where do I go? I'll go do the match, but it has to have meaning. There has to be a meaning. It has to move me forward. That's how he would pick how he does fights. And I know that's simple. I know that that makes sense. But some guys don't have a strategy at all. They don't have any kind of approach. Phone rings, pull a name out of a hat. Dominick shared what his was. Now, a number of fights ago, was it 3 fights ago for Dominick Cruz? Going into the ring, and John Anik announces on the broadcast that Dominick Cruz has never lost a fight that wasn't for a world championship. I have followed Dominick's career. He's a personal friend. I did not know that. Dominick Cruz has never lost a fight that was not for the belt. Wow. Jon Jones can't say that. I mean, it's a very big claim. Okay. So we got a very meaningful guy who 3 fights ago was relegated to the undercard. Important to know. Important to know. He went from a world title fight to jerking the curtain to a younger kid, which history says is going to beat him. And a lot of odds makers did too. Dominick was dominant. He looked great. He's back up to the main card. Now he's back up to a main event. So it's an interesting spot. What do you do with Dominick Cruz? Numbers don't lie. The years are going by. The surgeries have taken place. Some bitch keeps getting his hand raised. What do you do with Dominick Cruz, right? I mean, it's one of those things where every time you think you can take your eye off him, just give him a couple more. This will figure itself out. Cycle of life of MMA, and he keeps breaking the rule. All right, great. So he's the Tom Brady of MMA. All right, fine. But then look at Chito's spot. Chito's got to be a little bit frustrated. Now, Chito is the only guy to ever beat Sugar Sean. I do not believe that Chito is in a number 1 contenders fight this weekend. I don't think he is. And not because the rankings and not because the matches don't work. I think the calendar is against him. Whoever gets the final say has an advantage. And Sugar Sean versus Peter Yan is going to have the final say. Based on when Aljo and Dillashaw match up. I think the calendar is against him. Now, I also don't think, going against my own argument here, but I don't think Sugar Sean and Peter Yan's a number 1 contenders match. I think it's a number 1 contenders match for Sean, not a true semifinal. And I know that motivation is going to really take away from Peter Yan. Go, well, hey, that's not fair. I don't disagree with you, but there's a couple of guys that are in the exact same spot as Peter Yan. Just by example, the truest and clearest number 1 contender in the entire sport right now, Colby Covington. He is ranked number 1. He is the number 1 contender. Absolutely nobody disputes it. He cannot get a world title fight. And then you find out the rest of the story, and he's already had 2, and it's the same guy. And unless we get the belt off, it doesn't open up an opportunity. And I think that we understand that. But I feel that Yan is in that same position, with an exception of Aljo getting beat by Dillashaw. So there's just some moving parts. That's all I'm sharing. This is very regular and very standard for MMA. It is not very regular and very standard to have guys of this capacity and of this caliber and to have such unclarity. And let's say that I am right on what I feel to be right. Everything stays the way it is. I feel if Sugar Sean beats Jan, Sugar Sean's now fighting for a world championship. And that would not matter if Aljo had the belt or TJ had it. Which is a meaningful advantage that Sean has. If Jan wins the fight and Aljo wins the fight, I don't think they're getting matched up. You guys see what I'm saying? And Vera and Cruz are too early is what I think. So think about being in Vera's spot. And Vera has had an amazing career. I wish you guys would go back and look at it. You want to know who else has had an amazing career? But I feel you don't know the story. It's Jared Cannonier. You go back and you look at Jared, he's driving truck and he's in Alaska and he's fighting up at heavyweight. He comes all the way down. I mean, really interesting story. Really interesting story to make that ascension that he did. But Chito Vera's in a similar spot. Chito Vera had a record in the UFC that I could bring you dozens of guys had the same record and were released. Chito Vera, while putting that record together and still get another fight, still having somebody believing in him, giving him an opportunity, needed him, whatever the politics were, however hook or crook that came. Guys that beat Chito were released. Guys that beat him aren't even here anymore. He's a main event. I think he's ranked number 3 in the world. He's got a win by finish over Frankie Edgar, a world champ. I mean, he's in this awesome position, not to mention he's got the win over Sean. So there's a frustration. He's not the only one to be in the spot. I mean, if you guys follow the sport back far enough, you'll remember that Chuck and Tito were training partners, and everybody who watched it, including the manager, a man named Dana White, was well aware that Chuck could handle Tito, but they were friends. Tito had a bigger name. Tito had the belt. Keep them away from each other. Finally, Chuck said, man, I can't do this anymore. You're my friend. I like you, and I appreciate all this, but you have a run. I haven't got my opportunity yet. I got to get in here and get it. So it's just not the first time that this has happened, but how you're going to navigate it and what you're going to do with it does become very important when you start to look at the calendar. Right? It's one of those spots. It's one of those spots where you really got to figure and you really got to calculate. I believe, and again, with the calendar as my friend, looking at the calendar and being aware of where these pieces are, I believe whoever wins between Dom and Chito, I believe is going to call for a title shot. It's going to go on deaf ears. Going to be the right thing to do. Going to get a little bit of bounce. And we're going to take a look. We're going to see where Sugar Sean's at. We're going to take a deep breath and it's going to go nowhere. I believe they should position themselves immediately, right there on ESPN. They should position themselves to become the backup fighter for Aljo versus TJ. Which, by the way, is the same night as Sean versus Jan. And it's over in Fight Island. So you get assigned backup position for that fight, the world title fight. You got 2 chances. Don't come along very often. You're the only one over there. Look at what it did for Chimaev. You're the only one over there. You got a license, you're in shape, you're ready to go. And I just think it's the best opportunity. I know that's not what most guys strive for. I know it's a little bit of a swerve and it's not what they want. But if they look at it real objectively, it's something they could get. It's very meaningful. It would be a little bit of a curveball. It would catch on. It is hard to resist, particularly when you understand they're not just willing. They'll officially be in the position to step into the main event. I apologize, the world title fight. But you then have an understanding that you have another featured bout on that same card within the same weight class. I'll step in there too. I think you're going to get the opportunity. And one thing you don't ever want to do in this business is look weak. Don't ever call for a shot that you can't get. Tough. You look weak, you are weak. Requires some thought, it requires some strategy. But if I was in the camp of either Chito or Dom, and I had a good layout, I'm not a sandhagen, I'm paying attention, I know what's going on, I'm publicly calling for that backup position.